Good morning and welcome to World News, coming to you live from Warsaw. I'm Salia Strzemska. And we begin with U.S. President Donald Trump, who stayed true to his love for tariffs, signing an executive order on Thursday evening that substantially raises tariffs on almost every U.S. trading partner. The decree will come into effect on August 7th. Major industrialized economies are set to face 15% tariffs, including the EU, Japan and South Korea. But they seem to be getting off easy. Countries like Brazil may face a 50% tariff hike, whereas Canada saw its rates raised by 35%. On the other hand, the Wall Street Journal reported that, quote, the US dollar, which took a dive against global currencies after President Trump's Liberation Day tariff announcement in April, is recovering some ground this week as investors get a clearer picture of Trump's tariffs. And now on to the latest from Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy announced new sanctions against Russia in his nightly address.
Today, Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs is taking part in a meeting of European foreign ministers in Finland on the OSCE platform. I addressed the participants of this meeting. These will be new sanctions against Russia and new strong steps to support Ukraine. Thank you to everyone in the world who helps. I also thank Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa, the President of the European Commission and the President of the European Council. European leaders all clearly support the adoption of the law guaranteeing the independence of anti-corruption bodies, ensuring the proper functioning of all law enforcement institutions. European leaders, many ministers, we are receiving all these necessary positive signals that Ukraine is moving in the right direction. Today, a briefing was held at the office of the EU ambassadors regarding Ukraine's sanctions policy and our priorities. The Commissioner for Sanctions Policy presented very detailed recommendations. What could have the greatest impact on Russia?
I think it's disgusting what they're doing, said U.S. President Donald Trump, referring to the latest Russian airstrikes on Kyiv that targeted civilians, killing at least 26, including a child. The president selected August 8th as the deadline for Russia to halt its attacks and start a ceasefire process. But if nothing else works, the president said Washington is preparing to impose sanctions on Moscow.
I think it's Russia, I think it's disgusting what they're doing. I think it's disgusting. This is Biden's war, it's not my war. But I said if I get in, I'll try and get the thing stopped. But I think what Russia's doing is very sad. A lot of Russians are dying. You have a lot of Russians, more Russians are dying. But Russians are dying, Ukrainians are dying. You know, the United States isn't really involved in that war. It shouldn't be. And by the way, I made a deal with NATO where NATO pays us for everything that we send. We send them ammunition, missiles, etc. And we're not paying anything for that war. But I will tell you this, it should be stopped. It's a disgrace. And the ones that are dying are they're losing 7,000 now. It was 5,000. They're losing now 7,000 soldiers a week, Ukrainian soldiers and Russian soldiers. And they're also losing people now in the towns and cities because Putin's hitting them with rockets. No, I think it's disgraceful.
You have a 10-day deadline. You imposed a 10-day deadline.
Yeah, we have about 8 days. Yeah, we're going to put sanctions. I don't know that sanctions bother him. You know, they know about sanctions. I know better than anybody about sanctions and tariffs and everything else. I don't know if that has any effect, but we're going to do it. Europe is extremely upset. But this is a war that should have never happened. This is a war that wouldn't have happened if I were president.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has survived the biggest political storm of his presidential term yet, but his public image remains bruised after a week-long protest that led to the withdrawal of a controversial bill. Ukrainians reacted angrily to amendments that gave the general prosecutor, assigned by the president, power to move cases away from the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and reassign prosecutors.
In what was the first live-stream vote in Ukraine's parliament since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, 331 legislators voted on Monday to restore the independence of Ukraine's two primary anti-corruption agencies. Soon after Monday's controversial vote, and after a week of local Kyiv protests and criticism from European leaders, including Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, President Zelenskyy signed the new law reversing course. The controversy, which concluded in last week's dramatic vote, began on July 22nd when the Ukrainian parliament passed draft law number 12414, Even though the legislation severely hobbled Ukraine's two most prominent anti-corruption agencies, President Zelenskyy signed the legislation on the same day, disregarding both Ukrainian outrage and EU warnings. Protests against this legislation sprang up immediately, both in Kyiv and throughout Ukraine. On Monday, demonstrators continued to gather outside the Mariinsky Palace, the presidential residence, and Ukraine's parliament.
I am here now to show my public position, first of all, against this law, because we cannot eat this shit year after year, every day. People simply have to run out of patience at some point, and it has run out. That's why I'm here.
Outside parliament, protesters sang the Ukrainian national anthem.
My main reason here is to ensure that the President signs the draft law restoring the independence of NABU and SAPO. This has been publicly stated and the issue is scheduled for consideration. Therefore, I believe it's necessary to be here.
The new legislation was not just controversial outside parliament. Inside, a member of Zelenskyy's own party announced he was leaving the party because of the new law.
I am leaving the Servant of the People parliamentary faction. This is my reaction to last week's vote. There are many questions about the work of NABU and SAPO, but it was the creation of an anti-corruption infrastructure that was the main result of the Euromaidan revolution.
Statements by both opponents and supporters of last week's reform, as well as a physical altercation among a group of lawmakers, preceded the July 31st vote in the parliament. As the Ukrainian parliament voted live on camera inside, protesters outside watched and cheered the new vote. Zelenskyy quickly signed the legislation. For TVP World, this is Randy Potts.
A mix of celebration and criticism. That was how the European Commission officials reacted after Ukraine's parliament voted to restore power to the country's two main anti-corruption bodies. But is Ukraine still firmly on track to join the EU? Here's what we know.
Has the bill on Thursday in Ukrainian parliament reversing a previous legislative effort to gut the powers of the country's two leading anti-corruption institutions put the war-torn country back in the good books of the European Union? This is the big question in the Belgian capital on Thursday and comes hours after that legislation drummed up the necessary support to unwind a controversial move spearheaded by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, in which he watered down the powers of that country's two leading anti-corruption institutions. Now, we've heard from the European Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Kos. She was the first senior EU official to state that she welcomed this news. However, she emphasised and stressed that more reforms need to occur. This was echoed by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who posted on social media platform X her own statement. It's important to point out that the head of the EU executive had made contact with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, in which she expressed her outrage regarding this bill while demanding an explanation. But let's take a listen to what she had to say in this post on social media platform X.
President Zelenskyy's signature on the law restoring NABU and SAPO's independence is a welcome step. Ukraine's rule of law and anti-corruption reforms should continue. They remain essential for Ukraine's progress on the European path. The EU will continue to support these efforts.
Now, a spokesperson from the European Commission did clarify what further reforms in terms of anti-corruption needs to occur. He stated at a press conference on Thursday that this would comprise of appointing vetted international judges to the Constitutional Court, as well as appointing someone to head up Ukraine's Economic Security Bureau. He also listed a range of other issues, demonstrating that Ukraine needs to really hit the ground running when it comes to its anti-corruption reforms. This is the first step for any country that wants to join the European Union, something which the war-torn country has been fighting for ever since it lodged its application in 2022 following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, the question remains that despite this development, this optimistic development on Thursday, whether it is within the appetite of the President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to continue on with these reforms. Has he listened to the criticism coming from within Ukraine, those protesters themselves, as well as those senior officials in Brussels? Angela Scoogens from the Belgian capital for TVP World.
On August 1st, 2025, Poland commemorates the 81st anniversary of the Warsaw Uprising. Across the country, and especially in Warsaw, people will pause at 5 p.m., the hour the uprising began, to honor the bravery and sacrifice of those who rose up against Nazi German occupation. As every year, exhibitions, music performances, and multiple other events are planned across the city.
Every year on August 1st at 5 p.m., Warsaw stands still. It's the W hour, the moment the Warsaw Uprising began in 1944. Here in the Warsaw Uprising Museum, there will be commemorating events happening throughout the whole day. What can we expect? There will be workshops for families to learn what life under occupation was like. There will be a concert of so-called forbidden songs, songs that our grandparents sang to keep their morale up during the occupation. And of course, a special exhibition this year devoted to the legendary Polish paratroopers Cicho Ciemni, or the Silent Unseen.
When it comes to the silent unseen, these were very special, skilled soldiers that were prepared to undertake special missions during World War II here in occupied Poland. And we tried to tell their story that was forgotten for many, many years.
So if you're in Warsaw on that day, make sure to come to the Museum of Warsaw Uprising to see the commemorations or take part in any events around the city. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
And just to provide you with more context, the Warsaw Uprising of 1944 was a major effort by the Polish resistance to liberate Warsaw from Nazi German occupation. It lasted 63 days and, despite fierce fighting, ended in the city's destruction and the tragic loss of thousands of lives.
Each year, August 1st in Poland is shrouded in a veil of solemnity and unction. The day marks the beginning of the Warsaw Uprising, when thousands of Warsawians chose to take up arms and take a stand against their German occupiers. Men, women and children all took part in the attempt to liberate Warsaw and establish Polish sovereignty, whether through fighting, medical service or simply delivering letters. While early days of the uprising looked promising, with the insurgents catching the German garrison off guard and capturing a large chunk of the city, late August would bring shortages of food, medical supplies and ammunition. And with those shortages came ruthless German troops, who killed anyone, soldier or civilian, who stood in their way. Lacking substantial support from the Allies, namely the Soviet Red Army, the uprising began crumbling just like the city itself. On October 2nd, 1944, after 63 days of fighting the occupying German forces, the insurgency capitulated. Over the course of the uprising, between 150 and 200,000 residents of Warsaw lost their lives. Despite the unsuccessful result of the uprising, Poles old and young continue preserving the memory of those who died fighting for their freedom through museums, memorials and annual commemorations.
And of course, we'll be following the commemorations of the Warsaw Uprising anniversary throughout the day. Former Polish Finance Minister Paweł Wojciechowski praised the government for fighting tax avoidance by big companies, but said it still likely won't bring major gains to the budget.
According to this Tax Justice Foundation, about 36% of the profits of the multinationals are being shifted all around the world. So it's not a small problem. But in terms of EU and Poland effect, maybe that is below 1% of GDP. Maybe you can gather maybe between 1.5 to 2 billion zloty per year.
So it's not a huge amount.
Not a huge amount. So not a huge amount, but it creates a deterrence to increase the aggressive tax planning, tax avoidance. So it's a kind of vaccination against this malaise, this disease.
And that's it for our news bulletin. World Talks with Janusz Mrywinski coming up next.